Thanks for joining us on the Ethics Experts. I'm excited to have you on here. Why don't we just jump in? Why don't we get started? You can start kind of telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this game.
Sure. At 24 years old, my life was really going nowhere, and I figured I needed to get my head on straight, and decided a good way to do that might be to join the military. So I did that with the idea of doing 4 years in the military. That 4 years turned into almost 25 because I just liked it so much. During that time, I came up through the ranks and eventually retired as a command chief master sergeant, that's the highest enlisted rank you can be. But I didn't do that on my own. You know, I did that because I had great people to work with. And so I enjoyed that. I loved that life, and got out, and I decided, I was going to really retire after that 25 years.
You meant it this time.
I meant it. No, I didn't. It didn't work out. I was really, really in the way. My wife homeschools our kids. I was completely physically in the way, and just in the way of everybody. I needed to go out and find something to do because I was driving myself nuts, staying home.
Yeah.
So I went out, and as luck would have it, I got hired by a military contracting firm. And I don't know if you know the background on this, but about 2012, the Air Force had a problem in basic training. And what was happening, there was some sexual assault that was going on between MTIs, or the drill sergeant you see on TV, and the recruits. And there was sexual harassment, sexual assaults, all sorts of things alleged. And a lot of folks got convicted for those crimes, rightly so. And the Air Force realized I think it was at that point, when one of the points, that they needed some kind of change in their culture. Something was going wrong when these people in authority were misusing that authority so much. And so one of the things they wanted to do was develop some sort of character development course. And so they hired this company that I worked for to do that. Myself and another retired command chief and a colonel were tasked with developing a character development course. And we decided to do that through affective learning. And so I don't know what you know about that or what the audience knows about affective learning, but there's 3 different types of learning you can do, right? There's cognitive learning, which is learning facts and figures, kind of black and white stuff. And there's psychomotor learning, which is learning, how to turn a wrench, actually doing things physically. And then there's affective learning. And affective learning is kind of changing your feelings. And that's really kind of what we were talking about. We needed to put a new emphasis on centering these brand new recruits into what our core values for the Air Force. It was integrity, service, and excellence. What that really means. They all knew the words, right? They all knew the cognitive part. They all knew what are the core values, integrity, service, excellence. They all knew that. But they really didn't know what that meant, right? Deep down, what it really means to a person to have those things. And so we developed that course around those goals. It was a week-long course that ran right after basic training. Basic training, they came and graduated. They spent the weekend with their parents. And then they came in and attended our course for a week before they went off to learn their technical skills. So we developed that course. I ran that course for about 4 years, and it was really, really rewarding. At the end of the contract, the Air Force took those lessons and then put them back into basic training to be taught by these MTIs, these military training instructors, who had, to the Air Force's credit, had really come around to this way of thinking. That wasn't an easy sell at first, because it seemed like a bunch of huggy-feely stuff. And, you can, some of the stereotypical drill sergeant is true, right? They are kind of hardcore and do a lot of yelling, but these men and women were really understanding what it meant to change somebody, have them learn something deeper than than just facts and figures and how to do different tasks.
So it sounds like this was kind of a revolutionary approach to the teaching mechanism in basic training. Is that right?
Yes, I think the Air Education and Training Commander, which is I believe was a 4-star general at the time, he said that was the biggest change to Air Force basic training in its history. And so I was really glad to be part of that. I felt like it changed things. We had feedback and from the airmen. We have some statistical feedback too, but really the things that really drove it home to me that we were successful, where we gave these folks a survey at the end of the course, of course, to kind of tell how it worked, and we let them do some free-form writing. Now, these are mostly millennials, Gen Z folks, and I know y'all know a lot about that, but they pretty much tell you what's on their mind, especially if given anonymity. Anonymity. And so they were saying great things like, I understand what this means now. I understand what the core values mean. I want to be a better airman. And they didn't have to write that. And that was the predominance of the comments afterwards. They got it. It took me 5-6 years to kind of understand what those things meant when I was going through. I didn't understand it when I was a brand new airman. So we get a little bit of a jump start on these folks in learning that cultural development, the character development rather. And, these folks came from all different walks of life. You talk about diversity, the military is it. From every corner of the country to all the territories, to every, race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, everything is kind of thrown into one, all these different types of upbringing and different home life situations and educational development. I had airmen, brand new, enlisted, not officers, enlisted airmen with master's degrees come through sometimes.
Wow.
And then we had the folks that could, that they passed high school or, they were ready to go and wanted to start their lives. So it was a big, diverse group, and you had to get them all on the same page on this character piece because it was so important.
So it seemed to resonate, right? It went well enough for them to incorporate that into the actual basic training curriculum, as opposed to being sort of a course that you take kind of after the fact. What light bulbs went on aside from that sort of positive feedback that you guys got from the free form writing that prompted the Air Force to make that kind of whole cloth change?
So before this happened, before the course happened, I believe Rand Corporation did a survey, and they surveyed first sergeants at the first duty location. A first sergeant is kind of like an HR manager for folks that have been in the military. So they're really the people that are kind of in tune with the workforce. So they did that at their first assignment after they'd been there about a year. And then after we had been running the course for about 2 years, they ran the same survey again. And the great, it's really hard to measure training, but it's important that we do. So this was a great piece of that. And they found double-digit percentage increases in things like respect for diversity, treatment of the opposite sex, respect for authority, big thing in the military, and adherence to our core values. Those were double digits, up to 17% increases in those things over that 2-year period. So, the Air Force had gone through a lot of changes at that point too, but they certainly they actually literally credited part of this program for that. So the Air Force saw value in it, saw what it was doing to producing a better airman, and wanted to keep it.
So it was really just that kind of statistical change. It was really getting traction.
I think so. Yeah, I think it was really the statistical change that made the impact. Just like every place else, they need some sort of evidence. What's it doing for us? That's always a problem in learning and development. Is what are you doing, right? What impact is it making? So,
you talked about these 3 different learning types, right? Cognitive, psychomotor, and affective learning.
Right.
You guys didn't invent these, obviously. These are just kind of the big 3. Do you find that affective learning is sort of most effective for certain types of like tasks or principles? And or how were they able to sort of employ some of those like effective learning tactics to this this basic training process that maybe had previously had an overemphasis on maybe one or the other learning types?
Yeah, well, there are certainly different things. You learn to march, that's cognitive and psychomotor, right? You have to understand what you have to do, and you have to actually do it. So certainly those were big things before in basic training, and to some degree, affective learning has to do with any kind of feeling. And so, you've seen movies, and there's truth to many of those basic training type of movies. There's a lot of fear instilled in that, out of the unknown, out of the fact that you might fail. You've got a huge authority figure over you.
Right.
But I think what we did with Airman's Week, we took that affective learning. It's just like managing people. You can manage through fear and get some results, right? But if you manage and you're leading along with that management, and people are wanting to follow you, you're going to get better results than anybody just yelling at you and getting in your face all the time. There's still some of that happens in basic training. It's part of the remolding somebody into an airman. But along with that, we're talking about how you actually value things. And that's really where the affective part that, they did the other affective, the fear, the fear emotion was already there, but that wasn't done, I don't think, necessarily intentionally. Maybe some of it was, but this was definitely intentional in trying to get them to value the things that the Air Force values, and getting them to respect different people and different teams and how they work together, and really understanding it, as opposed to a book answer, a black and white type of cognitive answer. So
let's kind of dive into that a little bit. How did you get the success that you were able to generate? Like, what were some of the tactical things you did to augment that cognitive piece with that effective learning piece, to change those feelings at the root level, to ultimately change the behaviors down the road when a new situation presented itself?
Yeah, I think some of the things we did were we really concentrated on our demographic, right? I am 55 years old. On first glance, I can't really relate to an 18-year-old kid. But I was able to, I was able to, because we started to speak their language. We had these large group lessons and we had small group lessons. Large group lessons were up to 800 people. And in those forums, we did like a TED Talk. We based off TED Talks. There were just big pictures behind me while I was speaking to them. And I was storytelling. So all those things kind of engaged the millennial Gen Z demographic. We put things in short bursts. We used a lot of video, a lot of audio. So those were some of the mechanical teaching techniques that we did to kind of gain their interest, their engagement, as opposed to a bunch of PowerPoint slides with a bunch of words on them.
Right.
And then in the small group lessons that really started, you can't really do anything on feeling a lot with big crowds. We tried to get emotional type of videos and things like that in there. But the real nuts and bolts of it came down to the small group setting. And those were usually led by an MTI or one of our civilian instructors. But those, we really centered around discussions, classroom discussions. The instructor, I told instructors that if I went in and I saw them not speaking, I knew they were doing their job, because the students were kind of leading the discussions with prompts from the facility, really more a facilitator than an instructor. So they were guiding them toward the answer, but the airmen on their part thought that they were coming up with the right answer. And they did. They
Right.
did. One of the things we used was a set of videos that we created, and those are used now throughout the Air Force, not just at the airman level, but there's, I think, gosh, when I left, there was one for commanders, there was one for several different career paths. But we called it What Now Airmen. And there were a video production that we made where it presented a scenario to the airmen, and then we'd pause the video and we'd talk about it. So for example, the first one that they went through, and they may still do it, But we have a video of this airman. He's just coming off an airplane. He's a crew member, and his trainer comes up to him, or his supervisor comes up to him and says something like, you know, we've been able to complete most of your training. There's about 3 items here that we didn't have time to complete, but I know you can do them. I've seen you do similar tasks. I have a lot of faith in you. And, but I just need you to sign off on them so we can go on the next mission. And it's a really important mission that we've got to accomplish. And so the supervisor walks off, the airman just kind of turns to the camera and says, you know I'm supposed to practice integrity, right? I know I'm supposed to always do the right thing, but I don't know what the right thing is here. You know, do I sign this off even though I didn't get the training, or do I kind of focus on the mission? Because we're always talking mission, mission, mission. Right. I don't understand. And he looks at the camera and says, what would you do? You know? And then the next series, so we stopped the video, we talked to the airmen about what they'd do. And then we show we show some peer videos. Some of their peers going, yeah, of course he should do exactly what his supervisor says, you know. She knows what's the right thing. She's been in the Air Force for a long time. Then we'll switch to another, we'll talk to the airmen what they think at that point. We'll switch to another airman and said, no, he's got to tell the truth. If he signs off on that, that's like signing a legal document, you know? Right. So we have all these things, and the airmen see the conflict, and then they discuss among themselves with the facilitator, making sure they get to the right answer on what to do. And then at the end, we have like an authority figure for sergeant, a commander, a JAG officer that talks about what is the right thing? What are the ramifications for doing one thing or the other? Right. So they can see that without actually having to go through it. That particular incident, when I wrote it from my experience. That certainly happened to me, right? Where I was asked to sign off on some stuff I hadn't done. And I think the realism helped a lot then. The right instructors help a lot as far as the internalization of this. So that's how we got it into them. Right. We made them do the discussing, them come up with the answers. A very engaging, demographic specific course. And I try to do that with like all the training I do now because of how effective it was.
Yeah, it kind of brings them into the conversation. And to your point, once you can be participating in, you know, letting those gears in your head actually turn with respect to the ethical dilemma at hand, it helps you, to your point, to kind of experience it without having to go through it.
Exactly. And some of the airmen had different experiences. You know, we might have had older airmen that had been out in the workplace. It could bring that viewpoint to them.
Right. You know, it's kind of interesting, right? The military in general kind of has this reputation of like slow to change, last into the party and stuff like that. But I think recently we've seen the military sort of get out ahead of some of these things, even before, you know, private industry has. Why do you think that is? And what do you think is kind of driving that?
Well, I'd almost argue the point I know that the military is seen very conservative, very kind of bound by rules and regulations, and they are. But I think in aspects like this, you know, the military was one of the first organizations to become fully racially integrated.
Right.
You know,
that's another great example of what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think because we always have to be forward thinking, the military always, you know, lean heavily on innovation. If you look at the weapons and the space systems and different things that we have out there, I mean, they're very far ahead of, you know, things we take for granted now, like GPS. Right. Was something that was a forward-thinking military application that we used in Desert Storm and Desert Shield to find our way around in a desert. And now I get lost with Google Maps. Yeah. So, same sort of thing. Right. But but I think out of necessity and innovation, you know, I think we're heavily encouraged to innovate in the military, certainly in the Air Force.
So why is it so tough, you think, for organizations? Because I mean, I'm sure with the work you do now, it spans kind of both. You see the private industry, you see, you know, you've seen the sort of military, you know, machine. How is it that, you know, private organizations where you would think, you know, innovation is the name of the game, staying at that cutting edge is the name of the game. just like it is in the military. Why do you see them lagging behind on some of the stuff that we're talking about?
A lot of times, I think it has to do with money.
Okay.
The military gets a budget, and and people see the value in a military budget. And it's kind of what I was saying earlier. You have to prove your worth in the civilian sector, in the corporate sector, and I think a lot of training departments struggle with that. Showing your actual monetary worth. And so if you're not showing your worth, nobody's going to put any money toward those programs, and whether that's equipment you use to develop something engaging or not. The videos that we produced that I talked about, those were pretty pricey. We had professional actors doing them. We had a production company filming them. It was not just somebody with an iPhone,
Right.
filming them. So I think, but it paid dividends, and I think training departments have to focus on that. Training departments have to focus on showing their companies that they provide value, and that they deserve a seat at that table. So that was a big thing for me. It wasn't necessarily about money all the time when I was in the military, but it is in the corporate world. It really is. People are trying to make a business and make a profit out of their business, and they want it. And because of different experiences people have, I think some people look at training like, well, that's what I have to do to onboard.
Right.
And some people go, oh, well, I can learn something out of this. And quite honestly, I think in our time and the upcoming generations, maybe seeing more and more value out of this. And, we see a lot more online learning. We see a lot more things like Coursera and edX and some of those different companies that have online learning. You can just go pick a course and take something at a college level just because you're interested, and it's really affordable. And I think there's a lot to that as far as people wanting to learn. So I'm hoping that things are changing. But it's still, I think, and I'm speaking as a training professional, I think it's really on training departments to show their worth. You have to be able to do that.
Yeah. And, I couldn't agree with you more. The onus is on these leaders and these check the box functions. That's how they're kind of considered.
Yeah.
On them to kind of elevate out of it. And I'd love to kind of pick your brain a little bit about like how to do that, right? Because most people who are in the training game, they're singing from the same song sheet that you and I are singing from, right? Like they see the value in it. They see, man, we can really kind of change our game if we can get people trained right and really alter those behaviors, whether we do it this way or that way or whatever. But many times they're kind of in an organization where leadership, views it as kind of this check the box or this cost center. It's like, I got to have it. I got to send people through this training. How do we turn those light bulbs on at the top? Or what would you tell somebody who's kind of stuck in that type of a pigeonhole we're talking about? What could they do today and over the next quarter to really kind of burst out of it?
One thing I look at initially is things like turnover. Turnover, you got to find what that turnover cost is in your organization, and then see if you can get this. This kind of comes back to the effective learning. Every company, it doesn't have to be the military. Every company has some greater purpose, right? And it's not just money. It's what do you do? What's a plumber do? Well, I make sure that people's houses are safe, and they're all these they don't have any issues, and nobody gets flooded. They're not homeless.
Right.
If you back things up and you see the bigger purpose of your job, when you're doing that onboarding training, that checklist type of stuff, that I've got to do this, and you emphasize to them how important this job is, that it's not just a job, especially with brand new 18 to 24-year-olds, you're gonna make them feel a little proud about that, and then start to track what's the retention doing? Are we keeping more people? Are we actually keeping more people because they feel better about what they're doing? And then turn that into money, and then report that up every quarter and say, hey, look, our turnover is this much percent less, right? We've had this much, and here's what I did to help that. I think putting the hardest part is finding dollar amounts for it, right? For the program that I did for the Air Force, that would have been really, really hard if we hadn't invested a bunch of money up front for the RAND Corporation to say, this is what surveys had said. But you can still do surveys and find out how people are feeling about different aspects of it. And that was, the military was a really hard thing because they weren't really looking for money. They were looking for cultural change. But I think in a company, you can do that with different depending on what your company is about, but turnover is certainly something valuable to everybody, or reducing that.
Yeah. And, you hear those stories about the, consulting interview, and they ask you to sort of do something, estimate something crazy, like how many golf balls could fit in a 737 or something like that, or how many planes are over the United States right now, or whatever, right? And so I think there's something to be gathered from those questions that we as HR training, compliance professionals, whatever, who are, folks who are in these check the box functions can do to elevate. And I think what those questions are really looking for is a line of reasoning that will allow your estimates, regardless of what the nominal values are, this line of reasoning that will provide some kind of credibility to, the estimates that you're coming up with, right? Yeah. So to your point, if you can't find exact values, something that I find is helpful is to just start making estimates. And then, those estimates can be sort of debated, but you don't have to tie out to the penny how much a new hire is going to cost. It's going to cost a certain amount of advertisement, a certain portion of their initial sort of time in the seat is not going to be at full force, so to speak, as they're kind of getting up that J curve or that learning curve, whatever. But to your point, you can make you can string together a couple of reasonable estimates and use those to kind of paint a picture for an approximation for the savings that this new initiative is generating.
Sure, and I'm always a big believer in giving credit where credit's due. I think it actually helps your credibility too. But what I just said at the end of talking about Airman's Week, the program for the Air Force, that we had those double-digit percentage increases. It wasn't just about us. The Air Force had done some other things too. There are other contributing factors, but giving some other external credit also just kind of helps your credibility, that it's not all about us. But those estimates that you talked about are crucially important, because sometimes it's just so hard to get that penny number. And I wouldn't waste a lot of time doing that. I would do more what you're talking about, some good ballpark estimates, and then let people debate that if they want to, but they probably won't.
Yeah, they probably won't. And I think I've just seen a lot of analysis paralysis in exercises like this that cause people to not even put anything out there.
Excellent point.
To your point, with some degree of freedom, you can probably estimate within, to your point, the ballpark of what a particular initiative has sort of generated. And it's kind of inherent to these, to processes like these that are maybe a step removed away from the quote unquote value creation that can be sort of easily attributed, the bottom line expansion that can easily be attributed to whatever action we're talking about or whatever initiative we're talking about. The further away you get from that, the more of this sort of estimation you have to kind of put into the storytelling, so that someone can take notice. But if you're just waiting, I think the point here is, if you are in a company or an organization that views whatever role you're playing, regardless of whether it actually is or not, as a cost center, that's just to kind of check the box, I got to have it.
Right.
Waiting for them to just let those light bulbs naturally turn on from them just noticing, wow, our turnover's lower. When that's not a headline number, that's not going to show up on the financials. It's not going to show up on a KPI unless that's, part of what you're measuring. It's never going to happen. So to your point, it's on you to sell it. You got to sell it internally.
Absolutely.
And really push it.
Absolutely. You have to tell them how, and you know, I don't know if you can tell, but I get kind of excited when I talk about this stuff. And I think that is infectious too. You know, really, I think that's an excellent point, that you have to sell it. You have to sell it all the time. Admit your failures, but talk about what you're going to do to fix it when you have this. We had to do some adjustments to this program that we did with the Air Force too. We had an end of course test, right? Really was a situational, where we let them do a skit, if you will, right? A role playing exercise. And some of them just came off the rails of just being silly and not and not taking it seriously. And so we had to help them take it seriously, you know, talk about it way up front.
Whatever, right?
I'm sorry?
Make them do push-ups.
No. And at 55 years old, I wouldn't do push-ups unless I could, you know, get down there and do them with them. Man.
I got you.
They would beat me now. But you know, just you had to set the framework for them a little bit. So we had to do that adjustment. We had to go, okay, this is what you're going to get the first day. This is what you're going to get evaluated on, including that role-playing scenario at the end. And to get them to kind of take it seriously, then we remind them about halfway through the course, hey, you've got this coming up. So you have to be willing to say it may not be perfect right now, but it's good. We're getting it, and we're getting it better. And every time you tell them it's getting even better, and you can show them, I think you win.
Talk to me a little bit about your book. It's a bestseller. It's got a ton of great reviews on it. It's on my list to read this year. But what
it's
kind
a
of
pretty quick read.
To write it? What kind of, you know, just tell us about that process and the ethos of that book.
So the book is called I Got a Fever. And if I could rename this book now after COVID, I probably would.
Yeah, to what?
I don't know. I don't know yet.
I don't know yet. Yeah.
So it was based on, the name of the book is based on that Christopher Walken Saturday Night Live skit. I don't know if you know it, right?
Yeah.
I got a fever and only prescription's more cowbell.
Right.
And so I would go into this group of, the very first large lesson they had, 800 airmen. And I'd come out and do this Christopher Walken thing, you know. Mm-hmm. And I got a fever, you know, there's only one prescription, you know what it is? And they'd all go cowbell. And I couldn't believe, first off, that these young kids knew that skit, right. But they did. And I say, no, that's not it. And I'm looking for more professional airmen, you know. We kind of, you know, and then they'd all go crazy and cheer, and because they were very excited about the whole process. But the idea of the book is to kind of focus brand new, both military members and people coming into a corporate environment, give them some things to think about. Again, what it really does is it can help change them effectively. It's really hard to do in a one-way medium like a book, but it gives them some things to think about, and just kind of lessons that I learned over that military career, and then in transitioning to a civilian career.
Right.
So I wrote it with the idea that it would be for brand new people in the military or the workforce, and then transitioning veterans that are coming out of the military and coming into their first civilian job. So I really liked writing it. It was one of those things that had kind of been in me. And you know, a lot of people that read it, that knew me, said, "Oh yeah, I heard you talk about this before," because it's kind of my life stories, leadership stories, if you will, that have been given for probably the last 15 years of my career. So it was a lot of fun to write. Thank you for mentioning it. It's a lot of fun. I'm working on another book that's really kind of centered to HR professionals, ironically enough. And the goal on this one is I've interviewed about 50 veterans that have successfully transitioned to the civilian workforce, and kind of letting HR professionals understand what it really means to hire a veteran. What does it really mean to be veteran friendly? Because people say it all the time. It's kind of like one of those throwaway, we're a veteran friendly organization. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And to share what kind of stories these transitioning veterans have had, and their biggest challenges, the things they miss the most about the military, the things they love the most about the civilian workforce. So I'm getting excited about. I'm done with the research. I'm starting to write it, so hopefully that'll be out in a few months, um, and hopefully it'll serve folks well. I try to put this. I try to put my books. I'm not writing for money at all. I really just want to kind of give back, and so I'll put them out for free all the time. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, that's where I'll say, hey, it's going to be free for the next 5 days or whatever. And so I don't want people to spend their money on what I write, but if they want to, they certainly can. But I'd rather them just be able to see it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to get your ideas out there. So the book's been out for a little while. What are some of like the biggest surprises to you in that writing process? And then what are some of the biggest surprises since it came out in terms of, takeaways that people were left with that you didn't really expect them to be left with?
Well, the writing process itself was, I kind of sit down and just let my fingers type. I'm kind of a little OCD where I want to fix everything as I see it, and I'm not a very good typist. So it was a real chore to write. I had my kind of outline with my different chapters and just wrote those chapters as best I could without stopping. And so that was hard for me, but I'm glad I did it that way. People do it different ways. I thought it was incredibly easy. And if anybody feels like they have a book inside of them, I encourage them to do it. With Amazon, it was super easy I thought, to do it. And then even to get print copies out, it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. It cost me nothing really, other than my time and the desire to do it. The biggest surprises I got were, I guess having people really, some people seem to be very moved with what I wrote, and why I always hope that's the case. It was just that they would actually fess up that they were moved with what I wrote, or that they used it. So one of the guys that wrote a review was at the time an airman, a brand new Air Force recruit when I knew him, and now he had risen up through the whole ranks. He said, I keep a copy of this on my desk.
Wow.
And I was like, well, that's really that's really humbling. But that's what I wanted to do it for too, is to kind of pay it forward and let other people, you can take it or leave it. But it's kind of the things that I learned, and things I think that will make you have a successful career. I hope so.
So talk to me about unofficial leadership. I know that you spend some time in your book talking about that, and that's something that we talk about a lot, not only within our own organization, but just kind of broadly as we're talking to folks in the HR and the ethics and compliance game in various organizations. Talk to us about your kind of philosophy on that and the importance of this thing in people's careers if they can seize it.
Yeah, I think everybody has that opportunity to do, and we really do teach that a lot, I think, in the Air Force. You have a myriad of jobs, even in basic training. So, you think about the movies like Full Metal Jacket and those sort of things that people know about basic training. And you get a role assigned to you, like in Air Force basic training. So there are really important jobs like the shoe aligner,
Right.
The person that makes sure all the shoes are straight underneath your bunk.
Yeah, the guy who wins the war, right?
Right. But why do you do that? Right? What kind of pride do you take in that position? So the shoe aligner became really important in basic training, because if the shoes weren't aligned, the MTI was going to come and turn over mattresses and yell at you. And if the shoes were aligned, everything was good, right? Mm-hmm. No strife. So we kind of learned early on that anybody can be a leader, even if you're a shoe aligner. Doesn't necessarily have to have a title for it. And I think that is really my philosophy, that anybody can do this. You just have to kind of take charge of something, or take some responsibility for something, mm-hmm. and willingly accept it. Not necessarily given to you, although the shoe aligner was title given to you. But you don't have to do that. You can live and work forward thinking, right? Thinking about, well, what needs to be done in this situation? And no matter what your position is, your boss is going to appreciate that, right? People are going to take notice if you go a little bit above and beyond. And I think that's kind of what I mean. There are also people that just by their charisma, just by the kind of person they are and the cheerful person that they are. Everybody likes to work with a cheerful person. But you have a lot of influence. You have a lot more influence than you think. And all these airmen that I worked with, the young ones, they always had this unofficial leader, right? This person that was just charismatic enough that they all liked. Mm-hmm. And I would always pull that person aside and say, listen, I don't know if you know this, but people follow you. People really follow you. They listen to you. I had a young man as a weather forecaster. I worked at, which was my job originally in the Air Force. I worked in Vandenberg Air Force Base, which launches rockets, not with people on them. That one has, out of that base is satellites. And I had a young airman who worked for me, and he was really, really young compared to me. But he was a really good forecaster. He got really good at his skill. That was what we asked him to do, but he was really good at it. And I started watching officers asking him his advice. I started, old crusty civilians like me asking him for his advice. And so that's how he got his informal leadership, right? He got really, really good at his job. He's still a great friend of mine. So I count him as a big success story. He ended up retiring just a few years ago, but a fantastic individual. And believe it or not, he had stumbled at one point. He had stumbled, gotten in trouble. When I got there, he was about to get kicked out of the Air Force. And I had a talk with him because I saw how people were talking to him, were asking him questions. And I said, look, you've got a real opportunity to really be a leader. Own up to your mistake. He got a DUI. That's what happened. Take responsibility for that. That took money away from him and a stripe away from him. And own up to that and keep being the leader you already are. And he became a master sergeant eventually before he retired, which is a great senior NCO rank. Really successful young man. Now he works with the hurricane hunters down in Mississippi. So I guess that's bringing up a different point, but it's always a point I make with him, that informal leaders, we don't want to waste them, right? I saw a lot of value in him. You want to try and help those people through rough patches, and you want to help everybody through rough patches, but you really want to save those informal leaders because they can really run the rest of the organization for you.
Yeah, and the interesting opportunity there with people like this gentleman you were talking about is many times, at least in my experience, they don't even realize the impact that they're having or the leadership potential that they have.
Absolutely. I don't think he did. He was a humble guy. But he certainly led his peers.
So, I mean, maybe this is like an interesting philosophical question, but like, how much of leadership is just sort of thinking you can be one, and how much really needs to be rooted in some like actual outperformance? What's your opinion on that? Like, how much of it is an attitude and how much of it is an action?
A lot of it's attitude, and not only that, I think that attitude, and it's not an egotistical way either. Not in a, I'm going to be the best.
Yeah, not an arrogance thing.
Right, not an arrogance thing at all. But like with this guy, he just wanted to be the best weather forecaster he could be. He was always reading something that would probably put most people to sleep. It's just something really technical because he wanted to do that. So yeah, he knew some things, but it was really his inner drive. And that takes it all back to that affective learning. At some point, somebody instilled in him
right
a work ethic, which is a very effective type of thing. It instilled in him the drive to succeed. All those things are not learned by a PowerPoint slide with, to be an effective leader, you need A, B, and C, right? You don't really learn that. You have to internalize it. You have to do those things.
Right. Yeah, folks like that, to your point, they all seem to have some kind of a root inside them where there's something to work with, whether it's just a cheery disposition, which is kind of rooted in some kind of worldview or some kind of decision on how their attitude is going to not be affected by the rainy day or the world around them, whatever, or it's some kind of high work ethic, or it's something else. But I feel like it needs that kind of a root of some positivity to let that attitude overlay on top of it, because I feel like without that sort of inner core, it many times can just devolve into that arrogance that we were talking about.
Yeah, it can. And I want to add one more thing to that, Nick. That's a really good point. But it can happen. You can build that root, right? It doesn't have to be.
Good point.
Johnny grew up and he always had this good work ethic, and he had his bicycle, his paper route, and he mowed 85 yards every week and that sort of thing. It didn't have to be that way. And the reason I'm saying this is because of that experience with those kids just out of basic training. They literally came from every different situation you can imagine, and some of those kids, they would tell you their story and it'd make you want to cry. Grown, big. I'm 6'3", 250 pounds. It'd make me want to cry.
Right.
Because it's rough. Some of those kids really had it rough. And you take a kid like that didn't have any kind of work ethic or any reason to be cheery and everything. You take that first job that they have with your company, and you take an interest in them. That's a really important part. You take an interest in them, help them kind of develop.
Right.
Nobody wants to disappoint somebody that wants to do that for you. You can build that root.
Yeah, I mean, I guess no one's, maybe few people are just born with like this crazy work ethic, right? You got to build that at some point, and some people just are, everyone's kind of on their own path as to when those roots, as we're calling them, begin to kind of take,
Absolutely. Yeah, that was just my point, that doesn't have to be something you had from childhood.
Yeah, I think that
develop as an adult.
Yeah, it's an important point because, we can all kind of reinvent ourselves at any point in time. And whether you've been in your HR role for the last 20 years, or you're just coming out of school and just kind of getting your feet on the ground for the first time, to your point, so much of it is sort of mentality, mindset, and sort of a conscientiousness around the impact that you want to have. But that decision can be had at any point in our career.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've reinvented myself a million times.
Yeah. It's a good habit to have, man, because otherwise you're just going to turn into a static character. You got to be a dynamic person in the story of your life.
Yeah, it was one of the reasons I think I wasn't very good at retiring.
Yeah.
I had to go do something else. I couldn't just sit there and, I think I'd watched everything on Netflix and was at the end of Facebook.
Wow. You hit the end, huh? You hit the end.
I did. I'm like, wow, what else can I do? I got to go do something. So, and I think it's important to keep your mind open, no matter what role you're in, that you can continue to develop and change. And I had seen many of my peers, retired chiefs or sergeants major, depending on whatever branch you're in, that just kind of sit there at the end and that's all they do. And you hear all these people that die soon after retirement. I think that's part of it. You never want to.
You need a goal. You need a flag to run after or a hill to take or something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pardon the military pun, but it's really that purpose thing. If you're not recreating that every day, if you're not remotivating yourself every single day, it's going to fizzle out, and then you're just going to be sitting there on the porch, watching the seasons change.
Yeah, and I love to sit down every once in a while, but I also want to go see what's on the other side of that field. Let me go out there and investigate whatever it might be, just to keep your mind engaged. And it's so easy, I think, And, I know you're a young guy, Nick. I think as we get older, I think it's even more important to be open-minded about things. It's so easy to kind of get a narrow focus that I've been around the block. I know what I'm doing. I got all the answers. It's
Yeah, I've
kind of
seen
like,
it all. I've seen it all. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me, quite frankly, of, I've got 5 kids. As my kids turn about 19, my kids,
Mhm.
and they start going, well, I got this all figured out. I don't need to listen to dad or anybody else. I got this all figured out, and then you grow and about, 28 or 30, you're going, wow, maybe I didn't quite have this all figured out.
Yeah, my son's starting that already, but he's starting it at 9.
I have a 9-year-old too, Nick. Don't worry. You can still have 9-year-olds when you're 50, in your 50s.
Yeah.
So, but it's, I guess to the point is you just want to keep learning. You want to keep your mind open and always be hungry for learning. And as a training professional, I just had a talk with our vice president about this other day. I said, what kind of training professional would I be if I didn't want to learn?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
What
kind of
would that be the biggest hypocrite in the world? Yeah.
So, Charlie, how can people find you? As we wrap up here, I'd love to get some plugs in for you on how people can find you, read more about you, read more of your thoughts and musings and things like that.
Wow. Well, really, I try not to. The only place I'm really active probably is LinkedIn. Yeah. So certainly come and find me on LinkedIn. And I appreciate that. And that's where I'll put all my book stuff. You can certainly reach out to me and message me through LinkedIn. I sometimes have a day or two delay, but I love to hear from people and have conversations. I'm trying to engage the veteran community too. So if you're a veteran, you're listening to that. I have a lot of ideas for you, I think, and a lot of things I'd like to share with you, and I'd like you to share with me too. So
very good.
Thank you for that, Nick.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Charlie. This is a great conversation. I appreciate you sharing so much of your book and your philosophy on life and just your story with us.
Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your podcast. It's a great podcast. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks so much. All right. Have a great day, Charlie.